Thomas Grant was the perfect father, or so everyone believed. A quiet man raising his teenage daughter, Lily, in a peaceful neighborhood where crime was unheard of. But when Lily's three best friends vanished one by one, the community searched everywhere except the one place they should have looked, the Grant family backyard. What started as an ordinary summer night of laughter and friendship ended in the most shocking discovery the town had ever seen. Beneath freshly planted flowers lay a secret so dark it would turn a loving father into the most hated man in America. The neighborhood of Fairwood had a way of making people feel safe. Rows of identical houses lined the streets, each with trimmed hedges and flower beds that bloomed in perfect harmony. Neighbors waved as they passed each other, sharing small talk about weather and weekend plans. Crime was something people only saw on the news, never in their own backyard. Among these families was Thomas Grant, a man everyone respected. He was a single father, quiet and dependable, someone who never caused trouble. To those who lived nearby, Thomas was a man who worked hard to give his daughter, Lily, a good life. Thomas kept to himself most of the time, but when he spoke, his words were calm and reassuring. He attended neighborhood gatherings, helped with community projects, and always appeared polite. People admired how dedicated he was to Lily. She was his world, and everyone could see that. He rarely let her out of his sight, and some assumed it was just the protectiveness of a single parent. Nothing about Thomas suggested danger. In fact, many parents trusted him enough to let their children spend time at his home. From the outside, his house was like any other, freshly painted, a neat lawn, and a small white fence that gave it a picture-perfect look. Inside, it was spotless, almost too spotless, with everything in its place. The framed photos on the walls showed a man proud of his daughter, smiling beside her at school events and birthdays. No one questioned his devotion. In Fairwood, people believed what they saw, and what they saw was a loving father doing his best. Behind closed doors, however, Thomas carried secrets that would one day turn this peaceful neighborhood into the center of a horrifying story. The heat of early summer wrapped around Fairwood like a warm blanket as Lily prepared for what she called a little celebration. It was the end of the school year, and she wanted to spend the evening with her three closest friends, Hannah, Sophie, and Grace. They were the kind of girls who laughed loudly and shared secrets in whispers, inseparable since middle school. That Saturday evening, they gathered in Lily's backyard, bringing with them bags of snacks, soda bottles, and an energy that filled the air with excitement. The setting couldn't have been more perfect. The sun dipped low, casting an orange glow over the neatly cut grass. Music played softly from a speaker while the smell of grilled food lingered in the breeze. Lily smiled and tried to enjoy the moment, but something felt off. Her father had been watching from the kitchen window, his eyes fixed on the group. He stepped outside occasionally, offering drinks or asking if they needed anything. Each time, his presence lingered a little too long, and the girls exchanged glances, whispering when he walked away. To them, Thomas seemed overly protective, but they brushed it off as the behavior of a single dad. After all, he had always been polite, never raising his voice or acting inappropriately. When darkness settled in and the backyard lights flickered on, the laughter grew louder, echoing into the quiet neighborhood. No one imagined that this ordinary summer night would become the start of a nightmare. For Lily, it would be the last time she saw her friends alive. And for Thomas, it was the night his dark thoughts turned into something far more dangerous. Beneath the sound of giggles and clinking soda cans, a plan was already forming in his mind, one that would soon shake the entire community. 2 days after the celebration, the first sign of trouble appeared. Hannah's parents reported her missing. She had told them she was going to meet Lily at the park, but she never came home. At first, everyone assumed it was a misunderstanding, maybe a teenage argument or a sudden decision to stay with a friend. But when calls went unanswered and messages remained unread, worry began to spread. The search started small. Family and friends combed through familiar places, hoping to spot her. Nothing. A week later, Sophie disappeared. The community's concern turned into fear. 2 girls gone without a trace was not something Fairwood had ever experienced. Parents started locking their doors at night, pulling their children closer. Police were called in, and detectives began questioning everyone close to the girls. Naturally, they spoke to Lily, who seemed shaken and confused. She said the last time she saw Hannah was the night of the backyard gathering. When asked about Sophie, Her voice trembled as she admitted she didn't know where she had gone. Before the town could recover from the second disappearance, Grace vanished too. 3 friends missing within weeks. The news spread like wildfire, making headlines and drawing media attention. Rumors filled the air: kidnapping, human trafficking, maybe even someone within their own community. Thomas Grant stayed calm through it all, answering questions politely, reassuring neighbors, and even volunteering in search efforts. Detectives noted his cooperation and found nothing suspicious during their initial visit to his home. No one could have guessed that the man digging holes in his backyard under the cover of night was the same man who offered to help find the missing girls. The truth was buried deep, literally, and for now, Thomas remained the helpful father everyone trusted. The disappearances dominated every conversation in Fairwood. Streetlights became beacons for missing posters, each one bearing the smiling faces of Hannah, Sophie, and Grace. Their names were repeated on every news broadcast, every social media feed, every whispered conversation at the grocery store. People were desperate for answers, and fear settled over the neighborhood like a heavy fog. Parents stopped letting their kids walk to school alone. Friends traveled in groups. No one wanted to believe that something this horrific could happen in their safe little town. Detectives worked around the clock, piecing together the girls' last known movements. All 3 had been at Lily Grant's house the night of the celebration. That fact stood out, and investigators returned to the Grant home for a second round of questions. Lily appeared nervous, her hands trembling as she recounted the night again. She insisted her friends left one by one and that she didn't know where they had gone afterward. Her story was consistent, but the unease in her eyes hinted at something she wasn't saying. Despite lingering suspicion, there was no evidence to justify searching the property in depth. Thomas was present during the questioning, calm and cooperative, even offering the officers coffee. His steady demeanor reassured them that he had nothing to hide. He agreed to let them look around the house again, walking them through every room without hesitation. Everything appeared normal. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing unusual. Meanwhile, community volunteers scoured parks, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings. Search dogs were brought in, but picked up no strong scent trails. It seemed as if the girls had vanished into thin air. The lack of progress frustrated both detectives and families. No one imagined that the answer was closer than anyone dared to think, hidden beneath a yard filled with blooming flowers. It had been nearly a month since the first disappearance when the case finally began to shift. A neighbor living 2 houses down from the Grants noticed something strange. On warm evenings, an unpleasant odor drifted through the air, strong enough to make her gag. At first, she assumed it was a dead animal somewhere in the neighborhood, but the smell seemed to come from the direction of Thomas Grant's backyard. She mentioned it casually to another neighbor, and soon whispers spread through the street. The odor grew worse as the days passed, so strong that even people walking their dogs along the sidewalk noticed it. One evening, the neighbor decided to call the authorities. When officers arrived, they stepped into the yard and immediately caught the stench. It was sharp and unmistakable, something that couldn't be explained by a decaying animal. They called in a specialized team with cadaver dogs to investigate further. The dogs were released into the yard, noses low to the ground as they moved in circles. Within minutes, they stopped near the edge of the flower beds that lined the back fence. Their behavior changed instantly, scratching, barking, and refusing to leave the spot. Officers took note of the disturbed soil. The flower bed looked freshly planted, with bright new blooms that hadn't been there a few weeks ago. When asked about it, Thomas remained calm. He explained that he had taken up gardening recently, trying to make the yard look nicer for summer. Despite his explanation, the officers weren't convinced. The area was flagged for a detailed examination. Thomas stood quietly as they marked the ground, his face unreadable. That night, the entire neighborhood buzzed with curiosity and fear, unaware that the truth was about to be unearthed, literally, under a bed of flowers hiding a horrifying secret. Early the next morning, the forensic team arrived with shovels, evidence bags, and a sense of grim determination. The backyard was sealed off with bright yellow tape, and uniformed officers stood guard as the digging began. The air was tense, filled with the low hum of murmured voices and the metallic scrape of shovels against soil. Reporters gathered at the end of the street, their cameras pointed toward the once quiet home that had now become the center of a nightmare. The digging started where the cadaver dogs had alerted. The first few layers of soil gave way easily, dark and damp from recent watering. Then a sharp cry rang out from one of the investigators. A thin strip of plastic peeked through the dirt. Carefully, they brushed away more soil until the shape of a body began to emerge. The remains were wrapped tightly in black plastic sheeting, sealed with duct tape. When they pulled it from the ground, the unmistakable form of a human figure sent a wave of silence over the yard. But they didn't stop there. A few feet away, another plastic-wrapped shape was uncovered. And then another. 3 bundles in total, each stacked under layers of soil and blooming flowers. The stench was overwhelming, and officers turned their heads, some visibly shaken. The team worked methodically, photographing and labeling every detail before removing the bodies. As the remains were loaded into vans, neighbors stood behind the tape, their faces pale and horrified. The realization sank in that the friendly man who waved to them every morning had been hiding death in plain sight. For detectives, the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to a triple homicide. The next step was clear: find out why Thomas Grant had done this and how he had kept his deadly secret for so long. The autopsies confirmed what investigators feared. All 3 victims had been strangled. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle, suggesting they had been taken by surprise or subdued quickly. Toxicology tests later revealed traces of a sedative in their systems, indicating they were drugged before being killed. This detail sent chills through the investigative team. Whoever committed the murders had planned them carefully. It wasn't an impulsive act, it was deliberate and methodical. Back at the Grant home, a full-scale search was underway. Every drawer, every shelf, and every inch of the property was examined. In the basement, officers discovered a locked cabinet tucked behind old boxes. Inside, they found a chilling collection of items: ropes, duct tape, plastic sheets, and bottles of industrial-strength cleaning chemicals. Each object was tagged and photographed as evidence. Alongside these supplies were several spiral notebooks filled with handwritten entries. The journals revealed the twisted thoughts of a man who saw himself as a protector. Page after page contained rants about Lily's friends, accusing them of corrupting her, turning her into someone he didn't recognize. Words like dangerous, manipulative, and toxic appeared repeatedly. He wrote about keeping Lily safe, even if it meant doing something unthinkable. The handwriting became increasingly erratic toward the end, almost frantic, as if he had lost control of his mind. These discoveries painted a clear picture. Thomas Grant had not acted out of sudden rage. He had been building up to this for months, maybe longer. The evidence showed premeditation, intent, and a disturbing obsession with control. Detectives knew they had their killer, but the question of motive still haunted them. Why had a father who seemed so devoted to his daughter crossed the line into calculated murder? The answer would come soon, and it would be even more unsettling than they imagined. Thomas Grant sat in the stark interrogation room, his hands resting calmly on the metal table. He didn't look like a man who had just been exposed as a killer. There was no panic, no tears, only an unsettling stillness in his eyes. When detectives began their questions, Thomas answered without hesitation. He admitted everything. He confessed to luring the girls into the basement one by one, sedating them, and ending their lives. His voice was even, almost cold, as if he were recounting a routine task rather than 3 brutal murders. When asked why, his explanation sent a chill through the room. He claimed he did it to protect Lily. He said her friends were leading her down a dark path, filling her head with ideas that would destroy her future. In his mind, they were dangerous influences, threats that needed to be removed. I couldn't let them ruin her, he told the investigators, his tone disturbingly calm. I had to keep her safe. Detectives pressed further, asking why he buried the bodies in his own yard. His answer was just as chilling. I wanted them close, where I could watch over everything. It was clear this was not just about control. It was about possession, an obsession that had warped his sense of reality. Throughout the interrogation, Thomas never raised his voice or showed remorse. He spoke as though what he had done was an act of love, a necessary sacrifice. For the investigators, this lack of emotion was more unsettling than any outburst could have been. They knew the case was airtight, the confession, the evidence, the journals, but the sheer calmness of his demeanor left everyone in that room shaken. They had captured the killer, but the darkness behind his motives was only beginning to surface. As the investigation continued, a new and disturbing layer of the story began to emerge: Lily's involvement, or rather, her silence. Detectives interviewed her again, this time away from her father. The fear in her eyes told them everything before she even spoke. Slowly, she admitted that she had sensed something was wrong the night of the gathering. She remembered hearing raised voices coming from the basement after Hannah went inside to get a drink. She assumed it was an argument and didn't think much of it at the time. But in the days that followed, Lily noticed things she couldn't explain: strange smells in the house, her father washing the basement floor late at night, and his sudden insistence that she stay upstairs. When Hannah didn't answer texts, Lily felt uneasy. When Sophie vanished, her fear grew. By the time Grace disappeared, she was terrified. She wanted to tell someone, but couldn't bring herself to do it. Thomas had always been controlling, and Lily knew what he was capable of when angry. She feared that if she spoke up, she would be next. Her confession revealed just how deeply Thomas had manipulated his daughter. For years, he had convinced her that only he knew what was best for her, isolating her from friends and making her dependent on him. The journals found in his basement confirmed this twisted mindset, pages describing Lily as pure and in need of saving. It wasn't just obsession, it was a delusion that consumed him completely. For investigators, Lily's story was heartbreaking. She was both a victim and a key witness, trapped in a nightmare she didn't create. While Thomas sat behind bars awaiting trial, Lily was left to face a reality that would haunt her forever. Her father had killed her best friends, and deep down, she had suspected something all along. The trial of Thomas Grant gripped the entire nation. Courtrooms overflowed with reporters, and the case dominated headlines for weeks. Prosecutors portrayed Thomas as a cold-blooded killer who masked his obsession as parental love. They detailed the careful planning, the sedatives, the strangulation, and the chilling decision to bury the bodies in his own yard. Photos of the backyard with the flower beds became haunting symbols of the case, a reminder of how evil can hide behind the most ordinary scenes. The defense argued mental illness, claiming Thomas suffered from delusions and paranoia that distorted his judgment. They tried to paint him as a man who lost control under the weight of his fears for his daughter. But the evidence told a different story. The journals, the supplies, the calm confession, all pointed to premeditation. The jury took less than 2 hours to reach a verdict: guilty on all counts. Thomas Grant was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Thomas showed no reaction. He stood there, expressionless, as though the weight of his crimes meant nothing. His lack of remorse disturbed even the most seasoned investigators. For Lily, the ordeal was far from over. She testified against her father, her voice trembling as she recounted the fear that had kept her silent. When the trial ended, she disappeared from the public eye, seeking refuge with distant relatives, her life shattered beyond repair. The Grant home became a place people avoided. Over time, the yard where flowers once bloomed turned into a patch of lifeless dirt. Neighbors who had once trusted Thomas now struggled to understand how such horror had lived among them unnoticed. Fairwood would never be the same. The case left behind a chilling truth: evil often hides in plain sight, wearing the mask of normalcy.